Welcome to the Mindful Man Project, where we discuss issues, wins, losses, and learnings of men today. We leave no stone unturned, no avenue unexplored. The time is now for men across the globe to take stock, know who they are, to stand in their power, to guide those men coming behind us into the future. Creating a world that our children and our children's children will thrive and flourish, as we have done the work before them. I'm your host, Tyson Melvins. Welcome. On today's episode, I have return guest Luke Balcke. In a previous episode, I spoke to Luke on a more personal level and his journey which has led him to where he was. Luke is a certified Reiki practitioner and father of 3 boys. He also offers one-on-one astrology consultations and past life regression sessions, which will provide you with a greater sense of self-awareness, life guidance, and purpose. On today's episode, Luke and I dive into a concept and ideas of flat earth. As you tune in, allow whatever predisposed ideas and thought processes to be set aside for the episode. I invite you to listen with an open mind and take what you will from the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Flow States Collective Learn to Meditate 3-session course. Learn a self-sustaining meditation technique that will allow you to meditate wherever, whenever, without the aid of apps or someone guiding you. Reduce your stress and anxiety levels drastically in just 6 sessions. Get ongoing support, meditation journal, and access to a worldwide community of meditators. For all listeners to the podcast, you'll receive 15% off your course when you use the code MindfulMan23 at checkout. Welcome, Luke, back for a second time around on the Mindful Man Project. It's been a little while between drinks, so to speak. Yeah, welcome, mate.
Thanks, Tyson. It's good to be back, mate. It's good to see you again. And obviously been watching each other vicariously from the social media realm, but haven't had much personal contact since probably sometime in 2021, I think it would have been.
Yeah.
But
it's been a while. It's like
mate.
life kind of opened back up, hey, and we just kind of did it going.
Get back in the plane and do your thing.
Today we're going to be diving into some kind of, maybe some people might think of it a more esoteric viewpoint and a little bit out there, but it's a topic of mine that I've been really interested in for quite some time, still openly trying to get my head around it. Luke has pretty much got his head around it and is quite knowledgeable on it, and we're going to be discussing the flat earth theory or the flat earth truth model, depending on what you want to look at. And hopefully after this episode, if you have been a skeptic from or have been just kind of wanting to get your toes wet into the idea of flat earth, hopefully we'll find a little bit more clarity on it. And I do urge anybody who is listening to it to listen to the podcast with an open mind and just allow what is being communicated and imparted on you with the knowledge from Luke to just maybe just ask those questions and see where it is actually challenging your thought process, because it's going to be there's, like we were discussing off air, Luke, there is so many tenets and so many different tangents that could go in, and I think sometimes that's what creates that almost dissonance, because there is so much to contemplate outside of the globe that people just kind of go, okay, I'm going to just stick with the globe, because there's just too much to try and work out. So without me saying too much more, let's begin with probably a bit more of a brief overview, and then we'll come either come out or come in, whichever way you want to go.
So I like to sort of preface this type of discussion with the idea of the consciousness ladder. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah.
So it's like, everyone, 75% of people are living at the ground zero. They're not on their ladder yet. And at that level of awareness, they believe what they're being told to believe, what they're shown on the TV, what the education system, the media, the government, whatever. There's no need to question that at that level of awareness. And that's where the vast majority sit. But at some point along your journey of awakening or self-actualizing, you'd sort of take a step up on your ladder, and you gain a different perspective, a new awareness, because you have now raised your sort of level of awareness. For everyone, that first step is different, and it's very unique. I find it very rare that someone's first step up on their ladder is flat Earth. I think that the flat Earth step is usually, 5, 10, maybe even sometimes 20 steps high. So it's like, it's like that saying, don't go full retard. It's like you can't start with flat Earth because it's too overwhelming. But certainly every step you take, for me, my first step was 9/11, right? So it was 9/11 conspiracy video that opened my eyes to hang on, what's going on? Which then caused me to just keep stepping up on my ladder and looking at different, information and perspectives and all sorts of things. But at a certain point, you get to a level where you start to, this idea of the Earth being flat comes across you're able to, at least at a certain level along your ladder, you're able to absorb that awareness and go, okay, well, maybe it's time to have a look into that. And when it first came to me, it was about 2013, 14. And I'd not long began my journey into sort of exploration and all the different rabbit holes that you go down. And for about 12 months or so, I just didn't touch it. I just was like, yeah, it's just, that's crazy. Until such point that it just kept coming and coming and coming. And then it was like, back then, pre-2017, there was very little censorship on YouTube in particular. So there's a lot of good content. There's a lot of people speaking out. There's a lot of information and short videos and long videos that you could watch, which, I just absorbed and were able to then suspend my belief that I had at that ground zero level of the global model, which is a model that's presented to us from a very young age, and to start to question that belief system. And it got to a point where, if you ask me now if I'm a flat earther, I would say I tend to align to that model more so than the globe model, but I'm very open to any new information coming out challenging either of those points of view. But the further down the pathway you go with that flat earth, it's like it's almost gets to a point where you're no longer trying to prove the flat earth, you're trying to actually prove the globe. And it's like, you can't prove the globe without pictures, without some sort of mathematical formula they tell you, or without NASA's sort of intervention with their whole idea of, space and things like that. But if you just want to come to hang on, if we're on a ball and there's curvature, and then we should be able to measure that. It should be a measurable phenomenon that we can, and you just can't seem to measure curvature, which is one of the key things. And there's lots of different things like that. But water and the properties of water, there's a saying, what's true of the drop is true of the ocean. So in other words, the properties and principles of water don't change depending on the medium that it's in. If we put water in a glass, it'll take the shape of the container and remain flat and level on top. You take that same water and put it in a bathtub, it'll do the same principle. Put in a pool, the same principle. A lake, same principle. A big, huge body of water, same principle. All of a sudden gets into the ocean. Now we're starting to see water curve around the outside of a sphere and remain on the sphere, even though the sphere is in rotation and orbit and spinning and doing all sorts of revolutions. It's like the water can stick to that. And then they'll come in and they'll give you things like, oh, there's gravity, and that's understanding that. But then you dig into gravity and you realize it's a theory, and hasn't actually been proven. So when you start to look deeper in all these different layers, their whole idea of the model of the flat earth is built on these theories. But a theory isn't fact. It's just a hypothesis and put together oh, this is the theory. So yeah, it's like questioning your belief system. For me, for 31 years of my life, I was a globe earther, but I wouldn't call myself a globe earther. I was just saying I just believe the model that we're shown. And then having climbed on my ladder and started to gain different awareness and perspective on reality and consciousness, and and the control system that we live within, it starts to sort of emerge that could it be that the Earth's not how we've been told it is? I'm of the understanding now that we would more be living within a sphere and not on top of one, and that where we live in that sphere is the plane of inertia, or known as the physical plane. and that's a flat stationary plane. And when you then take that idea out into the natural world, you can prove that, whereas you can't prove the globe. And there's a lot of information on YouTube and people that will say they can, but go out for yourself and do it. And that's what I did. I'd go out with binoculars and look at things and be like, hang on a second. If we understand that we're on a sphere and this is a calculation of mathematics of how to work out the spherical trigonometry, then there should be some measurable curvature. And then it's like, hang on, this doesn't exist. So, and then you just start peeling the layers, there's so many different.
It's interesting.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, that's kind of like where I began to kind of question the things, it's like, obviously water, being a carpenter by trade, I know water level. Like, I was like, well, that's one question I began to ask, is like, what, and like even one of the oldest forms of finding level is have a water level, where you put in a clear tube, you put water on one side in the tube, fill it up, walk to the other side of your site, and then get water level. And that's in two different points with that water in two different points, and it's the same water level. And that was during my apprenticeship. And I questioned like my teacher back then, even when I was doing my apprenticeship, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, if the globe is, or the world is round, we're sitting on a globe, like, shouldn't that be out? Like, how is that level? And then he couldn't answer it. And he's like, well, it's just the way it is. It's water level. So I was just kind of sat with it. And like you, it wasn't until I hit my 30s, I began to really kind of think about different things. And there's, like you say, as you begin to kind of just look and sit in nature and realize this isn't kind of adding up in a way, that you begin to ask these questions. And like you were saying just offline there before, like, you have the few people who ask or go, hey, look at this, like, what do you reckon of this situation? Is this? And it's nice to be able to sit down and have a chat with someone who's gone a little bit deeper into that thought pattern of like what is occurring. Like, one thing that I've really been pondering at the moment, and it could be even just a pondering for people listening, is why can we see the sky color behind and in front of the sun and the moon?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever pondered that, but if you look at the sun and the moon in the sky, you'll be able to see black in front of if you have to use the moon, for instance, if you look at because you don't want to go and look at the sun right now if you're in the middle of the day, but it's like, if you look at the moon, there's like a darker tinge on the front, and then the sky passes in behind the moon at the back. So that's one thing that I've been like, what is, like, that could be a deeper thing of like, is deep space actually real? But it's like, then that's another kettle of fish. But that's one thing I've even been playing around with at the moment. And maybe we can unpack even like, and start to begin to unpack that, the sun and the moon trajectory, and how that actually moves through what would be a flat Earth orbit rather than a globe Earth orbit.
Yeah, I think
or maybe we start with how the map actually would probably look, and then maybe go through then how that would work for people.
For sure. So the hardest thing is when you start looking into this stuff is you've got your globe model and the teachings of that, and the sun's like 93 million miles away and it's so huge, and then the moon is 400 times smaller, but it's 400 times closer. So that means that from our perspective, they look exactly the same size in the sky. So they give you these huge mathematical equations that you can never, ever comprehend. No one can physically, mentally comprehend 93 million miles. Like, we can't understand that because we cannot perceive that. We cannot have a physical experience of what that would even be, right? But then we're given that, and that just helps the mind go, well, I don't have to think about that. That's just what it is, right? The hardest thing is when you start looking at the flat model is that you're trying to apply those key aspects of that model to the flat, and you have to actually let go of all of that shit. Space, you have to let go of the planets in the sense that we've been shown and told by NASA and pictures of space. You've got to suspend all of that completely and recreate a new model. And the model that most flat Earth people sort of resonate with is that the sun and moon are exactly the same size. That's why one can pass the other in an eclipse and completely close or block it off and occult it. And that they're more likely to be about 3,000 miles above the Earth plane and about only 32 miles in diameter. So relatively small in comparison to the model that they've given us in the globe, you know. And how many times have you seen that meme go around and it says, oh, you know, the significance of how insignificant we are on this globe because we're such a speck in relation to this sun, in relation to this galaxy. And that's one thing as well that the globe model does, is it creates this sort of level of insignificance. Whereas the flat model, it sort of puts you right front and center to the whole stage of the whole universe. Like it's actually just there above you and everything's sort of doing its thing, its dance. The cosmic dance is directly above you. So it gives you more spiritual significance. I feel that's what for me it gave as well, at least. But yeah, if you think about the sun and moon, if you go out when there is like a waning or a waxing moon, where you haven't got, like, say, let's say it's 3/4 or first quarter phase of the moon. So, and you got a nice clear day, you can't see the part of the moon that isn't there because of the cycle or phase that it's in. You can't even actually see it. Like it doesn't actually physically, like it's not there. There's just sky where there should be, at least, even if it's, we're only seeing the light on a particular angle on the face of a planetary body, we should still be able to make out the part that's in the shadow. But the fact of the matter is it just completely opaques and goes to an invisible sort of thing. So it leads you to think, well, what is that? Is that what we're, because we've been shown the pictures and the landing on the moon and the, you know, and we've been like, it's terrestrial, like it's an actual physical thing. And it's like, well, maybe our idea of what it actually firstly is needs to fully change as well. And I think that's also in relation to the sun. If you've ever done, I know you probably have, a lot of sun gazing in the morning or in the evening and the rising and the setting sun. There's a certain point once you start tuning into energy, it's like nothing you've ever experienced. When you look deep into that sun, it's almost, it becomes like this green color, and it's like, you know, it doesn't represent this idea of this ball of fire or hydrogen or whatever it is 93 million miles away, huge thing. It's just it becomes something different. So with the flat model, it's like it's much closer, they're much smaller. And the question is also, what are they? Like, are they terrestrial? Are they physical? Could you actually be, or is there some other explanation for it? I tend to lean towards some other explanation for it. What that might be, I'm open to, you know, information. I'm open to perspective. But yeah, I guess that's the sort of sun and the moon. I've seen in situations where you know, there's like cloud behind the moon, the sun when it's been rising and stuff.
Yeah, that's another one I was asking. Like, especially when you're watching that sunrise, you watch the sunrise and you see clouds behind it, and you're like, hang on a second. Like, especially when you're gazing, you're like, yeah, that's moving behind that. It's moving behind it. And then, so is there now clouds higher than the sun? Like, and then that's those many million miles away. Like, what is actually going on? So that's when you kind of begin to ask those. But for me, it was like when I really began to ask questions on what and dismantle my pure globe theory, because it was like, okay, let's pull this apart.
One thing that people listening to this can do as an experiment is they can go to the beach or to whatever vantage point they have and watch an early morning sunrise. You know, for obvious Melbourne and eastern states now, we can watch that come over the water. You know, otherwise, you could watch it go over the water. It's always good with the water because it creates that level aspect, you know, because it's sea level. But when you're watching that, like, it's called sunrise, not earth roll, for starters. Now, what we experience is the sun moving, you know, towards us or up in the sky. Okay. But if we just stop and suspend that and look at it purely from the globe model, what we're told is happening is that the sun actually doesn't move, right? We orbit it and we rotate. And that gives us our day, and that gives us our years and our seasons, right? So what's actually happening, even though you have no perception of it whatsoever, is that you are moving, right? When the sun's rising, you're moving towards it. So it's not sunrise, it's called earth roll, right? Literally, like, that's how it should be called. But just ask yourself, when you go and watch that phenomenon, what do you experience? You know, there's time delay footage of the sun rising and setting where when you watch this time delay footage, and it's hard now on places like YouTube to find this sort of stuff because the algorithm has suppressed all the good content when it comes to flat earth stuff, and they've put to the top such nonsensical fucking rubbish that anyone looking at it for the first time is really easy to dismiss, because it's just, it's like that controlled opposition. So they put a lot of misinformation, they elevate that to, in the algorithm to the very top of the search, and the next thing people are like, that's all rubbish. So trying to find some of these other ones, you have to really know the title of the video or get a proper link to get to these sort of things. But you can watch a time delay video of the sun rising, and it shows you like the sun moving towards you. Like it's not hard to experience that when you watch it, because it's like that's what it looks like, so on a flat earth model, that's what the model would suggest, that the sun is actually moving towards us. It doesn't it doesn't rise or fall, it's always at the same altitude. It's just that from our vantage point, the convergence of our line of sight means that we see towards a vanishing point, which creates this horizon. And when we're at a certain vantage point, right, that horizon is at a certain distance away. But if we were to elevate ourselves or the object that we're viewing in altitude, we then have a different vantage point, which then we have a different vanishing point. So in the sense of like the sun rising, if you were in Melbourne, let's say, and you're at the top of the tallest building and watching the sunrise, you would be able to see it before people on the beach, right? You'd be able to see it because you have a higher vantage point, so your vanishing point is much further into the distance. If we inverse that and we imagine that what you're looking at is the sun is really high in the sky and it's moving towards you, what's happening in the sunrise is it's just for the first time coming into your view, but where your actual focal point is creating that horizon line, the sun is higher than it and further away from it. So it gives you this illusion that it looks like it's coming up like this. It's moving up across that. In actual fact, what's happening is it's just coming towards it. And it's when you understand the mathematics, it's much easier to point out with videos and to look at this on a computer generated idea. It's like, that's the phenomenon. People think, oh yeah, but the sun goes down and then the sun comes up. So how's that work? It's like, actually the sun's not doing it. It's just moving across the plane, but it's coming into view because it gets into your focal point, right? But it is higher and further away than your vanishing point. Because the vanishing point is the limit your eyes can see to. So as soon as there's altitude, like I gain altitude in a building or the sun has gained altitude behind, that's coming towards me, it means that it'll cross a certain imaginary line that actually doesn't exist, known as the horizon line. And then there's the same phenomenon that happens when you're watching a boat sail away from you on the ocean. You can say, oh, well, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you can watch the mast disappear over the edge of the horizon. So it must be going away like this. And then, people go, okay, well, that proves that we live on a sphere. And I even have really a good friend who's a boatie, and he argues this point all the time. No, they disappear. And I'm like, you can now use technology through high zoom cat-powered lenses on cameras to zoom in on that same exact scene and actually bring the entire boat, the hull and everything and its seawater line into view. So if it was over the edge of the horizon and on a sphere and moving away, it doesn't matter how high powered of a lens you got, it's no longer in your line of sight. You can't see it. But the fact of the matter is you can watch it physically disappear and look like it goes over the horizon, grab a high-powered focal, high-powered zoom in, and then it's full back into view like that. That's because the zoom empowers our vision and our line of sight. We can then see further. So same phenomenon is happening with a ship going over the horizon and the sun actually rising across that horizon. It's just an illusion based on our vantage point, our convergence, where our eyes converge to, and then the vanishing point, which creates the horizon line. So, yeah.
So which leads me to my next question is like, we've got east and west, where the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. It's like the question for me that is then what happens? So it gets to the west. Where does it go? And then like, is it going around this stationary object like this, or is it kind of like, yeah, so can we speak into the sunset and sunrise, and how then that then occurs again the next day without an Earth that's spinning?
Yeah. So,
or is it spinning?
Because we've been fed the globe model, we think that the sun is huge and 93 million miles away and huge, so that if the Earth was flat, there should always be sunlight. We should always have light. But that's applying that model to the flat model, right? It's taking that idea and then saying, well, that should fit on this model. And we're saying, no, this model, you've got to exclude all that, propaganda, which is what it is, and you've got to recreate the model within the flat Earth model. The sun only being 3,000 miles in the sky, which is not very high, and then only 32 miles across. It's a very small light source. So if I got in a car and drove along like the Nullarbor, right, at a certain point, even though the road is flat, at a certain point, you can't see my lights anymore of my car. And it's just because they've gone out of your field of vision. Doesn't mean my lights aren't there. If on that same road, you then got binoculars and went zooming right in, you go, oh, there it is. I can still see the car. So it's the same phenomenon with the sun. It doesn't go out of our it doesn't move away so out of our line of sight. It just moves in as far as distance, to the point that it gets so far away that we no longer see it. And you got to remember, right, where we're looking to with our eyes, we have that vanishing point. Once things go beyond the vanishing point, that's why it's called a vanishing point, we can no longer see them. Our human eye, the way it works, doesn't allow us to see past a certain point. We can't see forever unless we gain altitude, then we get a bigger vanishing point. So that's what's happening when the sun is setting, right? It looks like it's going down. It's not. It's moving further and further and further away from this imaginary line called the vanishing point, which gives the illusion that it's going down. In actual fact, it's just moving completely out of your line of sight. Another way to think of this is, right, when it's sunrise here on the eastern side of Australia, the sun, it's like midday across over, which that's South America or South Africa. What's that one closest to us on that side, past New Zealand? Is it South America or South Africa? No, it's South America, right? So you imagine that. So it's middle of the day there. So we're getting this sunrise. We're getting first light when the sun is directly above them still. So that gives you an idea of how far away the actual sun is, but we're only seeing it just coming over the horizon. For people that are standing in the middle of the day, they're seeing the sun directly over them. It's just that we're much, much further away. So it doesn't appear, it just moves out of our line of sight. And then if you imagine like a dinner plate with a torch shining above it, and then the torch moving around the plate like that, right? And, a big plate, a small torch. There'd be a part of that in the pitch dark where the torch was shining, it would be daylight, and where it wasn't, it'd be nighttime. And that's that same phenomenon. It's just that because we're on the ground and it's elevated in height, once it moves past a certain point, it looks like it goes down. But again, it's not. It's the same phenomenon when we look at power lines. If we're standing on a road and we look up like that, there's a power line above our head that's like, 50 feet in the sky. If we look down the road, that same power line is actually that small and it's touching the ground. Like it's like tiny little power line, but it's way down there. If we were standing underneath that power line, it's exactly the same height, right? Yeah. It's exactly the same height. It's just the phenomenon when things move away from the focal point towards the vanishing point, they converge. And that convergence gives this illusion that we're seeing, things disappearing over the horizon. Must mean that we're on a sphere. And it's not. It's optical illusion is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that's a great one. And you just started to touch on like the torch going around the plate. I saw a video yesterday, and it was explaining flat Earth theory in respect to magnetic poles and magnetic north and south. And essentially what they were saying, which this will tie into that the sunrise and sunset, is like the Earth, or we'll call it the Earth. The Earth is a dinner plate, and then north is directly in the middle. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then imagine you have a magnet sitting in the middle of that magnet is north, And if you have a compass and you set sail on in the flat Earth theory, that compass is always going to be pointing towards the middle of the Earth, or the middle of that rotation. And if you set off in a due west direction, that due west direction is you moving around on your boat around in a circumference, or the circumference of the circle, rather than moving through the middle of the Earth, essentially. So that one was like, because that's one big question I've always had on my head. How the hell do they explain middle of the middle of the Earth, or north and south, east and west? And then just you then saying that torch analogy with the moving around, if it moved around towards the west as we know it, or towards the, going towards the west, it would be moving around in that circular pattern. And then if you overlaid the countries on top of that, then that's when the countries then start to come into focus on that focal point for the sun or the moon. So would then the sun, let's go then with the sun and the moon, they're then moving at opposite points in time. Is that, they're
moving at different speeds.
Different speeds, and that is why then we will have a lunar eclipse, and then sometimes a solar eclipse, because one catches the other.
Yep. And what that moon is exactly, whether it's terrestrial or not, what it actually is it a portal? Is it, who knows? I tend to think what is happening on the surface of the moon is the light reflecting of the sun on the Earth. And the sunlight hits the Earth and reflects upwards, just like you would shine anything on a surface. It's going to have a lot of reflection, and that reflection is what gives us that, phases of the moon based on where the moon is in its rotation. So that's why sometimes it's a full moon, we see full light, and other times it's like, there's a quarter moon and we're only seeing a part of the light. And it's just whether that moon is picking up the light reflecting off the Earth. And if you think about it, 70% of the Earth that we know, that's mapped, at least in the below model, is water. And you've ever been out on a boat on a hot day with the sun shining, you got to put sunnies on, you get worse sunburn than you do if you just, on the land, because you're not only dealing with direct sunlight, you're also dealing with reflected sunlight. So it's not hard to sort of stretch to think that, the moonlight that we see is a reflection of the sunlight off the surface of the Earth / the water. So that's an interesting sort of take on that as well. There's another point I was going to make then in relation to the dinner plate. That's a perfect analogy. If you imagine the central point of that plate as being the North Pole, and if that's magnetic, then everything's always going to point to the north, and it doesn't matter where you are around that dinner plate, there's always going to be a north point, right? But then equally, that outer rim, the outer rim of the dinner plate would be the South Pole. So it's not like there is a point for that. It's actually just the whole circumference of that, whatever that is. And then you think about like the Earth, if it were flat, then, how is the containment of that water, just like we did the analogy of the glass with water in it. Well, then you look at like pictures of Antarctica and you see this giant, 500-foot ice wall. And you have things like Operation High Jump and stuff like that from the 1940s when they did expeditions over the ice wall. So yeah, it's just challenging that idea of what we think with the something at the bottom and something at the top of this ball. The other thing is, you think about like NASA's supposed technology and ability with the Hubble telescope and the ISS and pictures from space. They could end this debate in an instant. They could just send up a satellite and they could take a picture of upside down boats. So boats on that part of we never ever get to see pictures of boats like that on the Earth. But as a part of the Earth, it's the bottom of the sphere. In relation to the top, there should be here where we could look and go, oh, well, look, zoom in there. Okay, well, shit, let's see New York. And that for them, that's their lived reality and it's flat. And then for us, in relation to that, then we're here, right? We're underneath that sort of side. should be able to have that same satellite look and go, oh, look, well, there is that bit. But you never ever get to see that. All you ever see is this elevated high altitude shots of, and it's always like this, it always looks like curvature, but that's simple optics with the camera lens, right? And the ability to just on a video, you can just arc the horizon and make it look like it's doing that. So it's one of those things that they, with the budget that NASA has, $50 million of taxpayers' money every single day is their budget, they'd have the technology and said, hey, we need to solve this. But that's not part of the program, right? It's like
that's like the information that they would be collecting is a lot different. Like they're looking at other deeper things that could potentially be occurring. That's like where I kind of want to go with, like, in the astrology, like you're an astrologer, and it's like that, how does that, like the stars and the moon and the planets that we've come to be conditioned to know, is that they're all moving in within our dinner plate, or they've got their own dinner plate that they're moving around, and then we're all kind of still orbiting in these different, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The question is there any rotation of that flat plane? Like, is that dinner plate spinning, or is it stationary? I'd come to tend to think, when from an esoteric perspective, when you think about the earth plane, it's the plane of inertia. It's where things come to rest. That's why things become physical, right? And they come into physical existence is because the energetic particles have come to that vibrational state. And that tends to be the state of rest. That's like a rock is a rock, it ain't moving, So I tend to sort of think that there isn't any rotation or movement of that flat plane, and that everything beyond that is in some form of, some
sort of orbit,
some sort of conscious energetic frequency or vibration, which would then give it the appearance of, or the actual phenomenon of movement, And if we think about, like, let's look really esoteric at the moment. If we thought about source energy as being omnipresent and, in other words, it's all everywhere, but it doesn't really have existence. It's not a tangible, you can't touch it, describe it, see it. You can just sense that there is a presence, right? That's non-existence. But then as that source energy differentiates from source energy down to manifestation, it does through different layers of frequency and vibration. And each time it does, it's going through different vibrational frequencies. It gives it the emotions and everything, until such point as it becomes physically manifested. And once it's physically manifested, we now have that plane of inertia, which we live on a plane, right? That's why we have aeroplanes that fly above a plane. A plane is a flat surface. So when you think about astrology, we've got the movement of the planets, which our ancestors called them wandering stars. The sun and the moon were known as luminaries because they lit up the sky, right? And a luminary is just a light. Whereas the planets were known as wandering stars. You had the fixed stars that didn't move, which become the constellations. And then you have the stars that moved about the constellations. And because they moved about and they didn't rest in one place, they were then given God status, right? So that's where we get the planet as being like Mars is the god of war, and Jupiter is, the king of the gods, and Saturn is the god of the earth, and things like that in the mythology. It's just that they then applied these human concepts to understand the nature of the expression of that energy, right? And it's just a light that moves through the sky. Fixed constellations, I would say, are a part of what's called the firmament, which is the structure or the dome or whatever that may be that is over the top of the plate. And if you think about the firmament, it's depicted a lot in the Bible, in the Simpsons movie, in Truman Show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's plenty of Hollywood showing us that there's something.
Yeah. Werner von Braun, he was a Nazi scientist that got brought out to the States and funded the JPL laboratories back in the 60s. And on his tombstone, he's got and so he's the guy that sort of funded or started jet propulsion laboratories, which then also sort of spawned NASA, right? Well, he was the dude with the UFO. He had UFO technology as well, didn't he?
I'm pretty
Because
sure.
supposedly the Nazis had either, gotten or developed or reverse engineered for some reason, right?
Mm.
But on his tombstone is a psalm from the Bible, which basically, it's paraphrasing, but it refers to the firmament in the sky, right? The firmament. In other words, this fixed dome of stars that sort of encapsulate the earth. So, when a lot of people think about astrology, they think about astronomy, and they think about where we get astronomy from, and like the Hollywood expression of astronomy is like space movies and NASA pictures and stuff like that. And they go, oh, that's Jupiter, and Jupiter's doing this. When I think about astrology, I think of it from a conscious energetic perspective and a frequency and a vibration. So I'm not thinking like Jupiter is this gas giant and he's so big and he orbit. I just think that that planet or that wandering star has the expression, so that when it's influencing certain aspects of physical known reality, it tends to express this type of energy. But in the flat model, when I came to that understanding, I was already studying astrology, and then I started to look into the flat earth. And most people will think, well, how can you be a flat earther if you're an astrologer? And the answer is flat earth reinforced my belief and understanding and meaning and spiritual connection to astrology. And without that, without the flat earth concept or idea, I probably wouldn't passionately pursue a career in astrology to the degree I do. Because what flat earth does allow me to do is go, okay, all of those fixed constellations, the wandering stars, the luminaries, they're in a fixed system, closed system, directly above this plane of existence where we inhabit, called the earth, right? And in the globe model, they want to let you think that we're an infinite speck in a sea of infinite specks that goes on for infinite, and there is nothing unique or specific or special or anything about you. It's just like, oh, what a coincidence, we're even here on this little piece of dust, of rock, or whatever. And it sort of gives this level of insignificance that's like easy to go, well, what's the fucking point, right? And that's almost like what the globe model allows. It's the seed of creating this level of disconnect within the collective of like, well, who gives a shit? Do whatever you please. Just fucking don't worry about being a better person or evolving or becoming consciously aware or claiming sovereignty over a soul. Well, none of that woo-woo shit. Just who gives a shit? Do whatever you want. Consume, entertain yourself, distract yourself, give yourself more. And, whereas the flat model is like, no, there's fucking purpose to being here, right? This cosmic theater is a show for us, right? This is happening here. And for thousands of years, our ancestors looked at that sky, and now here I am, a living being, human, looking up at exactly the same sky, and nothing has changed about it.
With the stars in exactly the same place,
exactly, right? So if you think from the globe model, we are orbiting and rotating, and then so we are sort of rotating for our day turn of the Earth's supposed to be rotating, then it's supposed to be orbiting the sun, then the sun is supposed to be orbiting the known Milky Way, and then it's orbiting this galaxy, and there's all these different speeds and time frames that we're doing this, yet the fixed stars and the planets, they stay in the same place and they keep doing the same thing, and it's just miraculously that we're all doing it together. Or that's bollocks, and we live on a flat plane, and all that's just happening. It has been happening forever, and for whatever reason, this is the system that the unfoldment of consciousness happens, and we're partaking in that. And there is something unique about you. It's claiming that uniqueness and that sovereignty and that spiritual connection, and reclaiming the connection to your soul, and that's the purpose of life in existence. Whereas the globe model is there's no significance whatsoever. It helps to reinforce this idea of people being completely oblivious. If they're able to, at a very young age, infiltrate the minds of the masses and convince them that the very nature of themselves and where they live in this cosmic plan is completely inverted and completely detached from reality, then anything else they choose to do in this whole mind control system is a fucking walk in the park. Like, it literally is, you're completely, you don't even know who you are or what you are or when you are, why you are, or any of that. And you think that you're on this spinning ball in space, then we can do whatever we fucking please. It's game, set, match.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Absolutely. Because you just become, like you said, you just feel like you're this minute, insignificant thing within everything else. And like you come back to like that esoteric level, it's like it takes people from their higher state of consciousness and potential and just rams them down on earth. This is where you stay unless you're rich and we're going to Mars. Like, and that's the thing, is like, you guys are dooming earth. Like, if you don't do what we tell you to do, you're going to doom earth, but rather than actually empowering people and knowing what they're actually here for and what they're here to do. It's
and
just, it's such a,
absolutely, it's like in that system, like, why does it matter? Or nothing matters. And the opposite is true. Like, everything matters. Everything you do matters. You matter. There is a reason that you are here having an existence.
You are matter.
Well, that's right. For this level of the evolution of the soul's expression, you matter. You come into matter. So it's like, that the flat earth model, along with my understanding and sort of research and learning into astrology, the combination of those two things make me go, okay, well, I know for me personally why I'm here and what we're doing. And then I become this sort of person that wants to stand in that place of, people stepping from the very ground zero and then onto their ladder. It's like, I'm there to go, hey, welcome to your ladder. Like, let's sort of see how far we can go with this, and helping people reconnect to themselves. So it reinforces for me the power and the meaning and the significance of astrology. It doesn't discard it or discredit it. Absolutely reinforces it. Helps me.
That's cool.
Yeah. Cool.
And it makes a lot of, like, and for me, it really clarifies like that whole, there's one question that I used to ask is like, well, why the hell do we see the Southern Cross in the sky the same all the time? The same thing, like, it's right there. It might be a few degrees different from where it was last night, but it's there. It's like you can walk out and see the Southern Cross if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's there. It's not in the Northern Hemisphere. Like, if we were spinning in a spinning ball, like, you should see at some point in time a potential of seeing the Southern Cross, but it's in that section of the sky all the time. And then I love how you explain like the planets, because like that and it also, just looking at what you've got behind you there on the wall, with all of the signs and stuff like that, and it just makes so much sense. When they're in that night sky, that is where they are, and like whether they're the god star or one of the constellations, it then begins to kind of add up. Especially for myself, having the open mind to think about this from an outer perspective. And then what I really want to touch on is, like, as a father, how are you approaching this with your children? Obviously they go to school. Obviously there's like the way that they're probably being taught. How you approach that sort of situation?
So I teach them to have an open mind, even though, because of my situation and their mother and we're not together anymore. So I have to respect that, how she wants to, her influence in their life and what she thinks is best for them. I have to also respect that, albeit try to impress upon them and her my point of view and perspective, but can understand that, that reality for them is, and the one that they're living in within at the moment is very a conditioned reality. So I can't sort of completely tell them they're silly or the teacher's stupid. I can just tell them that they're being taught what that someone wants them to know, and that to remain an open mind. And then, when I am with them, I'm always helping them question things. So I'll say to them, and I'll see something and I'll say, well, how do you explain that if the Earth's around, like if it was globe, how would you explain that? And I said, now I want you to explain that without using like a theory or some sort of something about like a picture that you've seen. I want you to try and explain it, And then I give them my explanation from the flat sort of model and help them understand that, like, I can explain it like this. Does that make sense to you? And help them understand. So it's not me about telling them this is how it is. I'm more teaching them about well, what do you think? And using their mind to think rather than just using their mind to regurgitate the program or what they've been conditioned to believe, which is what education does. It's a conditioning into a belief system. And whose belief system? Well, exactly, not theirs. It doesn't teach
Yeah, it
people how to
takes them
think.
out of that.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've been really considering, even like because River's getting these concepts of like he's something of a bigger whole, and it's like there has been a couple of times where I've caught myself saying a globe. Like you live on a big, no, like we live on a big plane, you know. So it's like it's conditioning to even just telling him, but then it's like you've made a really good point there. It's you give them both sides of the cat and essentially a bird and let them make the decision on what they feel. And I think that's where we're not given in schools. We're not given both sides of any story. It's like, this is what you're going to learn, this is how you're going to learn it, and don't question it, otherwise you're like seen as someone who is a dissonant to whatever is happening.
Absolutely. That they'll out if you don't go along with what's right at school, you're wrong. And if you're wrong, you're outcast. Oh, you're dumb, you're silly, you don't know, or you failed. And it's like, well, hang on, what if I just have a different point of view? But they don't allow that point of view. They don't allow the adverse point of view. And it's like, that's why education isn't about learning, it's about indoctrination into a belief system. They want you to think a certain way. So they're teaching you to think in that way. They're not teaching you to think openly and to question things. But, coming to the planet, like, and language is such a powerful thing, the words that we use and how they've been crafted in certain ways to describe certain things, which then become our known and lived experience. But if you think about the word planet, it's plane, right? And then it's got the word T or the letter T on the end. Well, T is a symbol for cross, right? So, Jesus died on the cross. The cross is always a symbol of matter. So it's like, it's the plane T of matter. We've been conditioned to think of planet. When you hear that word planet, you instantly think of a picture of a planet from space, or that we're on a planet like the globe. You see, what happens is your subconscious has been embedded into that symbol so often with that word that when you think planet, you subconsciously are associating that to this sphere and ball, or either something in space or something that we're on. But if you actually break down the word, you take the T away, it's plane, which literally is how you describe a flat, level, a flat and level surface is known as a plane. And then you just put the letter T on the end, which is actually matter. So it's the plane of matter, but we've associated it because we've been indoctrinated, because we've been bombarded with the symbol of the planet, that word means that. And it's like, that's how they manipulate the consciousness of the collective into a certain, because that's the thing too. See, when people start to question this, because of things like that, where their subconscious has been programmed to associate planet with a ball, when you bring some alternate information to that symbol, or the possibility that where we live isn't that, even though it's called a planet, their subconscious is like throwing up all of the programming. So they can't get their head around it. They won't allow them to. So that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in, and they don't have any ability to go in against that. It's like the program going, no, I'm programmed to think that. I can't break that. I always think in mind of that old movie, Naked Gun 33 1/3 with Leslie Nielsen. Remember those movies with Leslie Nielsen? And he did like what was that, Flying High one as well. And in that movie, there was like when they programmed the MK Ultra programming of the baseball player to kill the Queen, and it's just like all of a sudden he gets a command, and the next thing he's pulling out his gun, he's walking off the pitch, and he's trying to kill the Queen, and it's like that's literally the vast majority of people's programming. When you question the shape of the Earth, they're just like, boom, like triggered into like, no, I gotta kill that. Like that's not the reality. And it's so like, it's so clever in the way it's been done. Even when you think about when you watch TV and the amount of symbol of like the Earth or the planets being these balls of spheres, and even on the news when they present the weather, it's now done across this sphere. It's like everywhere you see, it's just constant embedding this same symbol, which then it just becomes like, well, that's it. That's the reality. And it's not, it's actually fucking magic. They've just
Yeah.
programmed you. So yeah,
It's
deep shit.
pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, you know, like when you start to kind of just allow yourself to have that expansive mindset to actually realize what is actually occurring. And then like even going on that expansion a little bit further, it's like I've seen like models and stuff where there's beyond the ice wall, like, and then you've got like Game of Thrones and stuff, how they cross the ice wall into the next part of whatever it was. So like there's also that potential that something else exists outside of what would be the south wall, you know.
Well, you know, look at the Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth. Middle Earth is Earth, right? That's Middle Earth. But go and watch just the recent series that they've come up with, the Lord of the Rings, which goes back like before the actual the movie series. There's now like I think it's on Bing or one of them. Which I love that sort of stuff because it's all mythology, and like they're showing you in those things without telling you, they're showing you. So it's like, allow that, wrong with that. But here's the thing, right? The question comes like, well, why would they do that? You know, why would they want to lie? Why would they want to do that? Like, what was the people? Well, imagine if that where we live is the plane of inertia, this physical plane is actually much, much vaster and huge and more, you know, and more like massive than we could ever imagine. It goes on and on and on, like, you know, to different realms and untapped lands and different cultures and everything that's outside of this little tiny circle where we are. How do you get people to never ever leave or want to explore beyond anywhere? Well, you just convince those people that they're on a ball in space and that you can't. So, and I've seen like people like the Bill Nye the Science Guy and Neil deGrasse Tyson suggest over and over, they've actually stated, well, it doesn't really matter whether it's pear-shaped or it's this shape, it's a closed system and you can't get out, like you can't leave Earth. And it's like, well, imagine if actually you fucking can. But no one would ever want to or try to because they're convinced that you actually physically can't. And that would make sense to me, is that beyond this ice rim that encloses our aspect of this plane called the Earth, that there's more. There's more land, there's more resources, there's more worlds, there's more places to experience. I've said to my partner before, because we talk about this concept from time to time, it'll ebb and flow in our life as things come up, and I'll just point stuff out. And she's very open-minded, but also still somewhat conditioned. And I've said, like, you know, if that became knowledge and you could actually like go and, you know, pioneer a new land or go and, I said, would you go? She's like, oh, I don't know. I said, man, I'd go. I reckon I'd go. I'd be like, yeah, let's go. Who's coming? Let's go and explore. You know,
go set sail due south and see what we hit.
Absolutely. For those people coming with information though, like you know, you have the Antarctic Treaty now, and you actually can't go where you're not allowed to go. They actually prevent you from going anywhere near it without some sort of prior authorization, and then only done under the government authority. So it's like, hey, a second, like, you know.
That's when you start asking questions again.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway.
Yeah, that's I'm just looking at the time. I want to be mindful of your time. But mate, we've covered some ground today. That's been wonderful. Yeah, we could essentially go a lot further and go over the ice wall and far away. But what we've really covered is, I think it's a great ground level of open discussion on this flat Earth plane that we're on. Yeah. And is there anything else that you would want to add before we wrap up? Also where people can find you, what you've got on offer at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things is that resist the urge to just jump on Google or, you know, a YouTube search engine and try and find information without having either a link that leads you somewhere specific, or without being told, like, research this channel or this guy or whatever, because you will confront a lot of propaganda, a lot of misinformation, a lot of controlled opposition, a lot of bullshit. And it's really easy at that level to dismiss this whole thing and go, well, those guys are fucking loonies and fuck this and go on with my life. But if you're intrigued and you want to research it, there's a couple of people that I'd recommend, which Eric Dubay has a lot of good stuff on YouTube. So Dubay is D-U-B-A-Y, I think it is, Eric Dubay. Santos Bonacci, he doesn't speak too much on the flat earth model anymore, but he's got a lot of old back catalogue information on his, which is Syncretism Society on YouTube. There's also another guy called The Tomb of Illumination, I think he is. He's a New Zealand fella. He's a little bit older. He's got some real extensive content on YouTube. And yeah, ask around, get some links. You can contact me directly. As far as for what I do, I obviously help people understand themselves and their life and help them evolve and to align themselves more spiritually in all different aspects of their life. And I do that using astrology. So if you want to get an astrology reading or a session, whether it's a healing session, I also do past life regression work. You can get in contact with me through my website, which is Luke Balcke, Balcke, or my Instagram or my Facebook or my YouTube, and they're all the same name, Luke Balcke. So yeah, if you want to get in touch, then absolutely be more than happy to connect. Or if you just want to ask questions about the flat earth, yeah, more than happy to answer as best I can. But again, I will say this at the closing: if information comes out tomorrow that it's not flat and it's some other shape, man, I'm open. I'm fucking open to that. I'll look at it and I will discern that, and I would use my God-given consciousness and my intelligence to be able to work out that seems plausible and legitimate or it doesn't. And, we're capable when we're given the opportunity to use our minds to think instead of just repeating the programming. So if it came out tomorrow that the information was contrary to that, I am not rigid or stuck to that belief system. I was for 30 years stuck to the globe model. When I first came to it, it was a massive stretch. It caused a lot of destruction in my family and my social circle because people thought I was fucking crazy. So if you're in a situation where you haven't got support around you, where you're going through this process of, upgrading your awareness, you're doing a lot of, self-discovery. If you haven't got people around you that support that, be very mindful of who you talk to about it, because they'll literally look at like you've got three heads. And it can be quite challenging, isolating. So yeah, I found a lot of the people that I could discuss about this sort of thing, which were random strangers online all over the world. And I had for a very long time in my life more in common with those types of people than I did with people I'd known and gone to school with my whole entire life. So yeah, you're not alone. You're just going through a process where you're starting to question things, and go for it. Keep doing it. Question everything. Absolutely.
As they say in Hollywood, we are not alone, because we aren't. There's so much potential out there when we actually realize it. And mate, thank you so much for coming on. I'll pop all of those people that you mentioned in our show notes and links to your site and socials.
Appreciate it, mate.
And yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Awesome.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for joining us. I hope you took something from that, regardless of where your mindset sits on the topic of flat earth. I definitely learned a lot more than what I actually knew. So that was fantastic. I'll pop all of the links, the people that Luke mentioned, in the show notes. If you like this episode, if you would like to give me a rating and review on the platform that you're listening on. And just a reminder for the Learn to Meditate course, it is Mindful Man 23 for 15% off discount on the Flow States Collective Learn to Meditate course. Hope to see you there.